Are you there?
Can you hear me?
Oh, just about. There you go.
Hey, Howard. 1 second. Let me just
Your audio is really rough. Give me a sound check.
What about? Hello.
Your audio is really not great.
Give me 1 second. What about now?
No.
What about now? Oh. Terrible.
It's like okay.
Okay, how about that?
That's much better.
Okay, cool.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
No worries. No problem. So your sound on your phone is much better. Good. All right.
Yeah.
So
I don't know what that was about.
it sounds like, is it a built-in microphone on your computer?
No, it's probably being filtered through the firewall.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Anyway, we're here. We can hear each other. We can see each other. So we can get going. Good stuff.
Yeah.
All right. Do you want to start? I mean, the questions you sent over are kind of interesting. So we could talk about that, or we can jump straight in and look at some pictures, take some pictures, whichever you prefer. I mean, I want to make it just like you jump in with a question as it comes to your mind, and I will try to answer it straight away, because I think that's the best way to learn.
Well, I think those questions will manifest themselves as we talk. Those questions are very practical questions.
Yeah. Okay. So in that case,
I will tell you this though. I did take measurements of my studio, and we are very close in space. 14. I did it by feet, and it was like 14 by 13 with a desk and within the space. So we're very close on our shooting arrangement.
Excellent. Well, you're lucky you've got the ceiling height, because to me that makes all the difference. And I would definitely recommend, if you ever go shoot anywhere else, to look for somewhere with a high ceiling, because I think it really limits your possibilities when you can't move stuff up. And also because you get loads of light bouncing around when you've got a lower ceiling, and that my look is based on shadow, right? So I like to be able to let things fall into darkness with control, and so the more room you've got for that, the better.
Sure.
I'm gonna put my camera on to share live view, and I'm gonna share my screen so that you can see what I'm seeing.
Roger.
I'm just going to share the whole thing. Don't be alarmed at the number of browser tabs I have open. People are always judging me for that. It's just
Don't judge you.
don't judge me.
I got you.
So yeah, we're going to have to work with a typical, a head because we haven't got a model in today. Let me open that up to something that gives you a visual where you can actually see what's going on. There
So I will say this about direction. Direction was very easy for me to understand because it's almost like where you put the light on the face, where the shadow falls. It allows you to tell the shadows where to be, direction of light.
Yes.
But when it comes to quality of light, it's very hard for me. I can see quality of light, but I can't create quality of light.
Okay. So my approach, I work with continuous light almost all the time, but I started out that's not really anything to do with it. I started out with strobe, so I always started out from the idea that I want a completely black frame. If I turn my lights off, there's no ambient light. I close the blinds on the windows and make sure it's dark in here, you know, as dark as possible. And then all of the light that you see in my picture is light that I've added. A lot of people, if they start with continuous light, they use continuous light on top of whatever ambient is there and use it in a more kind of gentle way. But I still carry over the approach that I want to start with a black frame and add all of my light in. So when you see, for example, if I've got a light that's obviously coming in from this side, and if I turn this up, what's going on here? Oops. There we go. So I'm typically going to have it something like that. So if I get my exposure here, that looks okay. You can see that on the right hand side, the camera right side of her face, it's a really dark shadow. So I use lots of fill lights so that the exact shadow density is under my control. So typically, if I'm doing something that looks like a simple one light setup like this, I've probably also got a light here, and I can vary the shadow density by adjusting how much fill I'm putting in. And that principle I use all the time, but sometimes I don't want my fill light to look obvious. So I very often use something behind the camera, which I'll just wheel something in now. And you've got some big, large modifiers, so those are great. If you put that behind the camera, okay, if I bring this back to somewhere there, I'm going to lose this fill light so we don't have any effect from it, and turn this off. So what I'm doing with this fill light here, I'll probably bring it in even closer. It's kind of going to be just behind my shoulders where I'm shooting from. And that, let me tip it over a bit more, make it a bit more precise. That is setting how dark my shadows are. So if I turn it off, I've got almost nothing there. Let me turn this off. Right. So all that you're seeing now, I mean, I would normally close the blinds up here, but I'm walking around and I want you to be able to see me. So that would be a black frame. And where I start is I dial in this fill that's behind the camera to get it so that my shadows overall the frame are where I want them. So probably something like that is a good place to start. And that means that everything is going to have a little bit of light, a little bit of detail. And this is because it's a big modifier and it's pointing straight forward, it's covering the whole of my frame, everything that my camera is seeing, and it's got no direction to it. It's not casting a shadow one way or the other. It's not interfering with what my key light is doing. When I use the other fill light from the side there, it's kind of competing against my fill light a bit because it's coming from the other side. So it's a slightly different principle. This is supposed to be like invisible and it's just straight on from behind the camera. And depending on what I'm shooting, if the person's wearing dark clothing or clothing that's got texture in it, or if it's like an older guy who's got like some stubble and some texture in his skin, I won't use the diffuser on the front of this thing. So you've got a more specular, crisper light to it. If I want it to be more kind of soft and, you know, romantic, or I'm shooting a younger woman or whatever, then I use that diffused, but it's the same thing. It's coming in from behind the camera. And if you've got that, you can then pretty much do whatever you like with the key light to create the direction, but you know that your shadows are never going to go too dark. And that way you're never messing around in post trying to bring them back up and all that kind of stuff, because you've got your baseline established.
Quick question.
Yeah.
You said that you undiffuse your fill light depending upon what look you're looking for.
Yes. Yeah.
Do you have an example of that?
So a classic example would be if the person's wearing an all black wardrobe, if you haven't got any specular detail in there, it's just a blob. You're not going to see anything. So I'll take the diffuser off for that, and then you get to see a bit more crispness and a bit more surface
Gotcha.
texture. The trade-off is that it's also going to give you more surface texture in the skin, but most of the time I'm not trying to flatter people too much. I'm more trying to make them interesting. So, you know, I don't do beauty photography, so it's not so much of a problem.
So a good example would be if you're doing a black and white photo of a guy.
For example, yeah. That's like the black and white photo of the guy that you put in the sample image. That's all about texture, right? Because I've got the textured background. He's got all his stubble. He's got like kind of wiry salt and pepper hair. He's wearing denim. It's like everything's texture in that image. And I love shooting that kind of stuff in black and white because it just, you get to play with all that texture. So yeah, we've got the baseline there. So then we just bring in the key light to where we want it, keeping the camera settings the same. So I'm going to turn that on. And you see that now we've got, it still feels like a deep shadow on the other side of her face, but we know that we've actually got the detail there. We've got it in the raw file because we know that the big light at the back is stopping it from going completely black. And then it's just a question of, you know, how bright do you want to go? What kind of direction do you want to go? If I swing this round more towards the camera position, then it's going to give me more wrap around her face. If I bring it more to this side, it's going to give me more shadow under her cheekbone and under her jaw on the shadow side. And then, of course, you can always tilt it over so it's coming down more from above if you want to create a bit more drama, because that gives you a bit more shadow under the in the eye sockets and under the nose. And that that's essentially the principle that I use for everything, really. Is to make sure that I've got the control of the fill light first, and then I can do whatever I want with my key light.
What I'm noticing is that the shadow is to the front of her face and it's leaving the back of her head in shadow.
Mm-hmm.
I love that control of the shadow and the highlight from the front to the back of her head.
Yeah. So there's two things going on there. One is, I'm going to take this light out again for a second. If we were just lighting with this light, if this was actually our key light, and I'll whack it up to a higher power so you can see that. I might need to open my exposure a bit. Okay.
Oh, wow. I didn't see that. I see it.
So if I open that up so that we can use this as the key light, the further away I get this from the subject, so if I move it back, the less depth it's going to create, right? The closer we get it to the subject, the more the difference in exposure from here to here. So you can use your fill light to create a bit of depth to begin with. And that's basically, I can't have it any closer than touching my shoulders, right? That's
sure.
Otherwise it's going to be in the way. So once I bring that in real close, that's as much depth as I can create with my fill light.
Wow. I thought that was being created by your key light and not by the fill light.
No, I switched over to use this as a key light. If I don't exposure to here, and then with the key light, the trick is in the positioning. And I'm glad you said you've got strip boxes, because I think strip boxes are really good for this when you're doing close-up pictures of faces. Because I'm going to put this, oops, I'm going to drop it out of this bracket. So do that. Get back in there. If we start with this, yeah, go ahead.
I actually bought those strip boxes after seeing Pedro's tutorial in the Headshot Crew.
Excellent. Yeah, I mean that's where I got all of my lighting techniques from. I do it like a different thing with it. I create a different style, but the techniques, the things that we're looking for are exactly the same. So I'm going to turn off the fill light for a second. With the fill light, when we switch it on, we're creating a bit of depth. But another way to create depth, or to add even more depth, is to look for the edge of the light on your subject's face. So as I turn this round, if you look here on her ear, it's now much darker than here. So to the viewer,
are you saying convergence or feathering?
Convergence only applies when you've got more than one light coming from like two different directions. In this setup, there is no convergence, because one light is filling the whole frame and this light is pushing sideways. But it's the same principle in that we're looking to have this light here like the front of her face, but not the back. Yeah?
Okay.
So
yes.
If I swing it round even more, that's really extremely feathered, which is cool, even more dramatic. Let me get it like that. I'm going to add a bit more power because we've feathered it so much. Now that's a really dramatic look, but the shadow is
beautiful.
Absolutely pitch black, right? There's no detail in those shadows at all. So then we just bring our fill light in to where it was, 35. And then we've still got the same drama of light on her face. We still perceive the same depth of it being much lighter on the front of the cheek than it is on the ear and the side of the head. But we've saved our shadows, and you can see on the histogram here, I mean, it's dark, but there's a little bit of detail there. So that's what we're looking for. And then, you know, the placement of the shadow on this side just depends on where we position that key light. If we want it to wrap around a little more, we can just move it a little further this way and open it up a little bit, or a little further this way and open it up a little bit, and so on and so forth. But it's always that same principle for me. Another way that I like to do this kind of principle is to use Pedro's parallel setup, which it is important to understand convergence for that. So let's have a quick look there, and we'll put this down to maybe 40. Bring this one up. 40. So the parallel setup kind of does the same thing, right? We're looking to put a lot of light on the front of her face, but keep it away from her ears and the sides. So again, we get that idea of depth being created by the contrast, essentially. It gives it a sense of depth, even though we've got very even lighting. But it's not very dramatic. It doesn't really do much for me in terms of, you know, my stylized portraits. But what we can do very simply to add a pop of drama to this is bring in a hard light. Do you work with hard lights much?
I wish I could.
Of course you can. You just take the softbox off of your strobe and use the little reflector that usually comes with it. What strobe do you have? What brands?
Godox. Everything is Godox.
Cool. Yep. Okay. That's what I use when I'm using strobes. So I'll take off this Fresnel lens because that's not relevant to us right now. I'm going to show you it with continuous light because it's just easier to understand when we're teaching, but it's the exact same thing. I'll get one of these. Yeah.
Gotcha.
So you've probably got a small one that came with one of the Godox strobes.
I do. I'm pretty sure I have the same one you have.
Cool. Let's see if this is on. Yes, that is. And then what we're going to do with this is position it so that we get, if I've got enough room in here, just about. So I'm going to lift this up a little higher than her head and point it down at her. So I haven't switched it on yet. In this parallel setup, we're using the two strip boxes as the key light. Yeah, there isn't really a fill light. They're doing double duty, but because they're the main light, we'll call them the key light. What I'm going to do is use them as a fill light by simply dialing down my exposure a bit. Oops, wrong dial. Sorry, new camera.
Gotcha.
There we go. I'm going to dial that down maybe to there. So it's underexposed a bit. And I'm going to use the hard light as the key light. And that's going to give me a crispy nose shadow and a hard bit of shadow. Where are we? Where are we? About there, looks right to my eye. And maybe I'll just open the exposure a little there. So we've started to get this shadow that's under her nose that's characteristic of that style of hard lighting. And it's just a question of the ratio between the two for the mood that you want to create. But we're starting, as always, by looking at our fill light and letting that determine our exposure. If I go lower on my fill light and dial it down to here, then obviously I'm going to have a much higher ratio from key light to fill light, and that's going to look like that, which to me is not very sophisticated. I prefer it to have a bit more fill in there. So if I take my key light down 2 stops, and turn my exposure back up 2 stops, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. That is, well, that's probably too much now. Let's go 1 stop, 1, 2, 3. 1, 2. Something like that. So I've still got the sense of drama, but I've still got the control. And then in that position, I'd probably have the subject.
So your ambient is what, 2 stops underneath? Or your fill light, I'm sorry, your fill light is what, 2 stops?
Well, you know what? I never measure that stuff. I don't work with a light meter. So yeah, I can't tell you exact ratios. I just go by my eye. But we can.
No, it's fine. It's fine. So that's what I'm having a hard time with. So that is, so it almost looks like a stop. It looks like about a stop.
It's probably quite close. Yeah, it's probably quite close. Because when I get into post-production, I push the contrast up a fair bit.
Gotcha.
But I don't want to have it. I don't want to be too committed to the contrast in the capture, because then you don't have room to do anything different later on. So yeah, something like this ratio that I've got right now is how I would shoot it. We can definitely see the shadow of her nose, and we can definitely see the direction of the light and all of that good stuff. But there's plenty of detail in there. So if I want to push that down in post, I can. If I want to bring it up, I can, within limits, obviously, not too much, but you know, it gives me the
that's about a stop. So my photography mentor is named Jide Alakija. He's London born Nigerian. He shoots about a stop during weddings.
Okay.
About a stop. And then he does the rest in post. Well, you get what I'm saying. Now, it's not post dependent, but he shoots about a stop too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
So I mean,
that's beautiful.
That's the thing. Like, if you want it to look dramatic straight out of camera, the way that I do that is in my capture software. Let's just shoot her. If we shoot a frame of her,
but the information is there for him to play with, just like you.
So in my camera, I've got it set. It's going to load up in a second. Here we go. In my camera, I've got it set at the moment with flat contrast. But if I want it to look contrasty in the capture, I can just put the contrast setting up on the camera, but the actual raw file doesn't have that much contrast. So when I get to post, I've got all the stuff to play with, you know? And because I usually work with the camera tethered and I've got the client here and they can see it as we're working, I like to show them something a bit more contrasty because that has more, you know, wow factor or whatever you want to call it. Like they're like, oh yeah, that looks cool. But I know that I've got the detail in my raw file so that I can manipulate it if I need to, if I want to, later on. And that's
gorgeous.
That's essentially the trick. So as I go to post, I would just bring that contrast back to maybe -1 or maybe even -4 if I want to have a real play with it. And then I've got loads of stuff to work with in post-production.
Gotcha.
That's the trick.
Let me ask you this. So are you seeing these images in your mind before you actually start?
1 second. It's telling me that I have to upgrade. Are you logged in on both?
I shouldn't be. Hold on, let me make sure I'm not. No, I'm not. Okay. Or is the other, did you ever kick the other person out or the other me out?
I didn't, but it only says 2 people in here, so I don't know why it's telling me I have to upgrade for 2 people.
Tell you what, why don't I log off and then log back in to make sure it's only us?
It's fine. Let's just go. If we get kicked out, then we'll just start a new Zoom call on the same invite. Yeah, I think that's
okay.
So, do I see it in my mind? It's a question that comes up all the time. Lots of photographers have got different answers, and I've tried to work out how it works for me. And I think what happens is I have in some bit of my brain a lot of images that I've seen, things that I think look cool, movies, posters, people in the street, whatever, and it all goes in there. When I've got the person in front of my camera and I'm just looking at angles and moving lights, I will feel, oh yeah, let's move you this way, or oh, pull up the collar on your coat, that's going to look cool. And then afterwards, I realize where that came from. I'm like, yeah, because that's like that shot that I saw, you know, and maybe it's based on the person's, like their physical look, maybe it's based on their personality. Like I had a guy come in a month ago and I'm like, this guy looks like David Bowie. And I didn't immediately try to do a David Bowie shot, but it's like, oh yeah, like the things that are going to look good to me are probably echoes of things that I've seen of David Bowie. You know, it's that kind of thing.
Same exact way.
Okay, so it's instinct, but it is just based on stuff that you've consumed, right? That's
and once you're looking at them, then you come up with an idea, and then you may execute on the idea, or you may get an inspiration. Yeah, same exact way. I've never heard anyone say it, but that's exactly how I work.
Okay, cool. I think it's the best way because, well, obviously it depends on your personality and how you work. But what I really hate is when somebody gives me a brief, because then I feel like, oh, right, I just have to do that and nothing else. And it feels very constricting. And I'm like, well, like, we can do that in 2 minutes. Like, why have we booked a whole session? Like, if that's the thing I've got to do, I'll just do it, you know?
Right.
But at the same time, if we go in with no ideas at all, it's like, well, we could do anything. And then you just don't know where to start. So it's always a bit like, you know, I want a jumping off point. And usually with my clients, that's me asking them, what kind of work do you do? I work a lot with actors, but it's like, oh, like I do commercial stuff or I do dramatic stuff on stage. And that, like, what was your favorite role? Well, I was this detective guy. I'm like, okay, right. I know where we're going now. And where we end up might be completely different. I don't care, but it just sets me in a motion. But sometimes I just do that for myself. Like I want to try a new technique, or I've got a new light modifier, and the next person who walks in, they're gonna get it,
Yeah.
You're paying me, but you're my guinea pig, I'm gonna
Sure. Right.
try and make it work for you and your personality and what the pictures that you want to get. And sometimes they like them, sometimes they don't, and it's fine. That's
Sure.
so yeah. But yeah, with the hard light, I'm just going to go back to talking about another thing about technique of lighting and edges. So we looked at with the panel when we only had one, finding the am I not showing my screen now? Sorry. Let me share again.
Roger that.
And then you can see my live view over here. So we're looking to find that edge where we keep her ear darker than her cheek. And with the panel this close, it's a soft light. If we want to do the same thing with a hard light, I use flags. And a really, really, really cool way of doing that I really do all the time, is I use my strip box as a flag because it's got a straight edge on it. So I'm going to put this, I don't know if you can see exactly, if I turn this guy on here and just pull back a bit, I've got my strip box just pointing at the wall behind her, but it is maybe, I don't know, maybe 8 inches in front of her. So it's spilling a little bit of light onto the side of her head and pushing most of the light onto the back wall. And then I'm going to bring my key light to light the front.
Okay.
And if I just
Gotcha.
turn that up a lot, too much. So I've got this line of shadow that's created by the edge of the softbox that's here. Let me pull back a little so you can see. And if I move the softbox, we lose all of that effect and the background goes bright. And bring the softbox in and zoom in with the lens. Now I've got a dark background and I can bring that edge to wherever I want it to create the shadow that I want on her. But even more importantly, I can control that shadow density by how much power I've got going through my strip box.
That's pretty cool.
So then I've got that control over the ratio. The reference shot you sent me of the woman standing where she's kind of like split light. It looks like the light's coming from one side and then the other, the black and white shot.
The black lady?
Yeah. So
okay.
I mean, it's done from the other side because I was working from the other side, but there's a hard light coming in, but there's also a flag stopping it from hitting the near side of her face. Something like there.
I know which one you're talking about.
probably tilt it over just a little, like that. And then the density of shadow on the background is controlled by the strip box that's also doing double duty as a flag. And then I have another strip box in at the side to give me the fill light control. And my old friend, the big softbox behind me, just to control overall how dark the very, very darkest bits are going to go. And with her, I think I used it without diffusion because I wanted that gritty look. The expression is very much like, I don't know, she doesn't look happy, right? It's not.
Yeah, I think I know exactly what you're saying.
So that's the
Let's see.
technique. And people see that shot and they say, like, either they say, oh, is that one light? I'm like, no, that's like 5 lights, man. Or they say it's confusing because the light seems to be going in 2 different directions, to which I say, well, you're allowed to use more than one light. It's okay.
You know what? And maybe that's why it threw me for a loop, because there was so many lights.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then it's a different type of light that people aren't used to using also too.
Exactly.
Mhm.
I'm let's jump off and then relog back in on the same call on your
Okay.
phone. I'll see you back here in a second, okay?